All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Um, I am very pleased to announce that we will be hosting this presentation. The title is Navigating the New Canada Food Guide, and we welcome Laura McLean to present for us today. So Laura McLean is a registered dietitian based in Edmonton, Alberta. She is a private practice dietitian and founder of McLean Nutrition Consulting. Laura has over 19 years of clinical and private practice consulting experience, and she's very well versed in communicating with the media. You may have heard her chatting with Mark Connolly on CBC's Radio Edmonton AM, seen her on CBC TV, or read her quoted in Chatline or in Living Magazine. So with that, I would like to welcome Laura.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. March is Nutrition Month, and this year's theme is Unlock the Potential of Food. Food has the potential to fuel, the potential to discover, and the potential to bring us together. I'm really excited to be presenting today on the new Canada Food Guide. I think Health Canada has done an excellent job revising this resource. In the webinar today, I'm going to be discussing what's changed with the Food Guide and why. I'll be sharing key messages and resources that you can share with your communities. I'll also be touching on broader ways that you can use this tool and others to unlock the potential of food and create healthier communities. All right, so we're going to be talking about the background of the Food Guide. We're going to be talking about the evidence and engagement that went into the Food Guide. We'll be focusing on what's new with Canada's Food Guide, and then follow it with a summary and the next steps for the guide. Finally, I'm going to be sharing some resources having to do with Nutrition Month. And I do welcome your questions throughout this session. So we're a nice small group. My goal is that you will get the most out of this 1 hour time that we have together. All right, so I'm going to start with the background on the Food Guide. So Canada's Food Guide has quite a long history. This is actually the 9th revision of Canada's Food Guide. It was initially introduced in 1942, and at this time, food was scarce. It was called Canada's Official Food Rules, and they acknowledged wartime rationing while endeavoring to prevent nutritional deficiencies and to improve the health of Canadians. One of the key messages on this resource is actually to include liver, heart, or kidney once a week. So I'll have to admit that while I enjoy liver and onions once in a while, my children are hard-pressed to be wanting to follow these guidelines. So I think they're very happy for the revisions over the years. Now, all of this information about the history of Canada's Food Guides is available on canada.ca/food guide. And so I'm particularly interested in it, but in view of time, we're going to breeze forward on this. And if you're interested in reading more about what was recommended in the 60s, you can go back online and have a look in more detail. So why the Food Guide matters to Canadians? The Food Guide is actually integrated widely by governments and stakeholders into nutrition policies, programs, and resources. The Food Guide is taught in our schools, and it's promoted by health professionals when supporting Canadians to eat well. The Food Guide can also help influence the foods that are served and sold in Canada's public institutions, from daycares and schools to long-term care facilities, as well as the foods Canadians choose for themselves and their families. So it's very widely used. Why healthy eating information matters. An unhealthy diet is a primary risk factor for disease burden in Canada. And nutrition information can be difficult to use and understand. It can also be very confusing. There's conflicting healthy eating messages everywhere. And Canadians need credible healthy eating information. So why revise our our previous food guide? And the main reason for that, there are actually two main reasons. And the first is to address challenges for users. For example, in my private practice and in working with patients, I found that Canadians were no longer finding that they could relate to the food guide. They were having a really difficult time applying the recommendations in everyday life. And it was difficult with that one-size-fits-all food guide, single food guide, to provide the right information to the right audience. So while it might have been really useful when food service was planning a seniors menu, for example, sometimes when we were using it in home, people were feeling like if they followed Canada's food guide, they would be eating too much food. And so to address the challenges for users, they decided to revise. The other main reason to revise was that so much more evidence had come out in that 12-year period, and we wanted to ensure alignment with the most current evidence on topics like sodium, salt, saturated fat, and sugars. Any questions with the background? All right, moving forward with the evidence and the engagement that went into the food guide. And I think Health Canada has done an excellent job with this. Our food guide is based on solid evidence. The new guide reflects the best of the latest evidence on food and health. Only high-quality scientific reports on food and health were included in the guide. There were over 400 convincing conclusions that were included in the guide. There are 2 documents that are available on canada.ca/food guide. They are the Evidence Review for Dietary Guidance 2015 and the Food, Nutrients, and Health Interim Evidence Update 2018. And they form the foundation of the food guide. Health Canada did an excellent job of excluding industry commissioned reports to reduce the potential for or the perception of conflict of interest. There was responsible and meaningful engagement that went into the food guide. So Health Canada consulted extensively to ensure that the resources that we have now are evidence-based, that they're really useful, and that they're relevant to Canadians. So the review process was enhanced by including 2 phases of public online consultations with Canadians and interested stakeholders. So over 40,000 people were involved in helping to identify what we needed in a food guide and what we expected from it. And to help communicate this guidance accurately, there were targeted consultations held with academics, Indigenous experts, and national Indigenous organizations, provincial and territorial governments, other federal departments, as well as health professional regulatory bodies and health charities. The new food guide has openness and transparency. So any submissions received, all those 40,000 people involved, all of those submissions received during public consultations were summarized in What We Heard reports that are available on canada.ca. And when Health Canada met with organizations to discuss the food guide, details, including the name of the organization and purpose of the meeting, were posted on canada.ca. Health Canada's Office of Nutrition Policy and Promotion officials responsible for drafting the food guide did not meet with industry representatives to discuss the food guide. And so this is the first food guide where there was no seat at the table for food companies. The food guide is user-centered, so public opinion research and consultations were done to understand how healthy eating information is used. In terms of health literacy, a lens was applied throughout the crafting and testing of messages. So the messaging is very relatable to Canadians. In terms of diversity, the food guide was tested with a range of ages, household incomes, locations, education levels, and cultural backgrounds. And many considerations were made, including determinants of health, the environment, the cultural diversity, including social, cultural, and historical context of Indigenous peoples. So a lot of planning has gone into this new food guide. So drum roll, please. What's new with Canada's food guide? So at a glance, the new food guide is not just an all-in-one single resource. It's an online suite of resources that better meet the needs of users like the general public, policymakers, and health professionals. And highlights include actionable advice for Canadians on healthy food choices and healthy eating habits, including things like cooking more often and being mindful of our eating habits. There are updated recommendations on saturated fat, sodium, and sugars, including guidance on confectionaries and sugary drinks like soft drinks, sweetened milk, and juice. And it's mobile responsive web content to support Canadians to eat healthy whenever and wherever they go is excellent. So the online suite of resources are available in English and French. The new guide delivers healthy eating information in a mobile-friendly web application that's available anytime and anywhere. The online entry point is the Food Guide Snapshot. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Underneath that, and I just love this, there are over 57 recipes, or actually over 50 recipes right now. There's actually 57, I counted them up. And they give really practical, good, some of the recipes are quick and easy. Some of them have wonderful cultural diversity, but they give real actionable advice. And there's also many videos that are included in this advice as well. Online, there is also available Canada's dietary guidelines for health professionals and policymakers, as well as the evidence, including the evidence review for Dietary Guidance 2015 and the Food, Nutrients and Health Interim Evidence Update 2018. Now this Food Guide Snapshot is a fantastic handout that you could use in the community. It could be printed on a single page, and one side is what to eat, and the second side is how to eat. They've moved to a guide where if you click on, for example, have plenty of vegetables and fruits, or you click on the vegetables and fruits on the healthy plate, then you have a whole bunch of information about vegetables and fruits. You could click on the Eat Protein Foods tab, and that would give you more information on Eat Protein Foods. So there's just this wealth of information online.
Hey.
In terms of an individual resource, though,
I'm here in the office. I was supposed to be in this meeting.
Sorry, I'll mute her.
Thank you. On the resource itself, it provides a lot of key messaging. And something that I love to use with my clients and patients, or people that I'm talking to in the community about the food guide, is talking about trying to get half of what we eat from fruits and vegetables, a quarter from protein foods, and a quarter from whole grains. Here's an example of 2 recipes that are online and available. One of the recommendations in the new food guide is to eat more plant-based protein. And this is not only good for our health, but it's good for the environment. It doesn't mean that we can't enjoy meat and fish and chicken and all sorts of different types of protein, and we can, because there's so many different ways to follow a healthy, well-balanced diet. But let's say that you don't eat a lot of plant-based protein and you're looking at how you can fit that into your life. Well, here's a great recipe that you could give a try to, orange soy tofu pockets. And as you can see, they've got great visuals. It's very inviting and has detailed information on how to prepare this meal. I also highlighted a savory broccoli and cheese muffin because a lot of schools, being nut-free, families are wondering, what can I send in my children's lunches? Well, this could be a really nice option along with the vegetables and fruits, etc. Or it could be a really nice breakfast on the go. So the new food guide resources provide modern visuals. So here's our old rainbow visual, and it's been really replaced with modern photography featuring healthy choices and eating habits. There's renewed terminology that's used. So the previous food guide used terminology that like our food group terminology, and the new guide uses terminology that Canadians already use when making food choices, such as protein food, rather than the specific food group. And I just, again, can't highlight enough how much I like that Canada's Food Guide now goes beyond food, beyond the what to eat. So instead of a prescriptive focus on food groups, the number of servings and the serving sizes, the new guide includes at-a-glance information on what to eat and provides actionable advice on how to eat. For example, be mindful of your eating habits. And when you delve into that, if you were to click on that, you would get further advice such as avoid watching screens while eating, eat without distraction, or cook more often, enjoy your food, eat meals with others, use food labels. The new food guide has considerations for Indigenous peoples. As part of reconciliation, the Government of Canada acknowledges that program and policy making must support self-determination, as well as recognize the distinct nature and lived experience of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. The integration of Indigenous considerations has been informed through engagement with Indigenous academics, health professionals, and national Indigenous organizations. Input to Canada's dietary guidelines address the social, cultural, and historical factors that are determinants of healthy eating and that may influence the application of dietary guidance in Indigenous populations. Indigenous health professionals and health professionals with experience and expertise working with Indigenous populations provided input to inform the food guide snapshot. So there are many considerations that have gone into this food guide. Canada's dietary guidelines were published in January of this year, and this is a guide for health professionals and policymakers, and it forms the foundation for the food guide resources. And it's for use if you're developing policies, programs, or educational resources. It provides guidance on nutritious foods and beverages that are the foundation for healthy eating, foods and beverages that can have a negative impact on health when they're eaten on a regular basis, food skills as a practical way to support healthy eating, and supportive environments for healthy eating. Now the next number of slides really gives some detailed information that is provided in the guidelines. So under Guideline 1, in Section 1, Foundation for Healthy Eating, vegetables, fruit, whole grains, and protein foods should be consumed regularly. Among protein foods, consume plant-based more often. Why? Patterns of eating that emphasize plant-based foods typically result in higher intakes of fruits and vegetables, nuts, soy protein, and fiber, and lower intakes of processed meats and foods that contain mostly saturated fat. We know that eating more vegetables and fruits is linked to a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Eating more nuts or soy protein is linked to improved blood lipid levels. High fiber intake is linked to improved blood lipid levels and a lower risk of cardiovascular disease, colon cancer, and type 2 diabetes. Processed meat has been linked to colorectal cancer, and foods that contain mostly saturated fat are linked to unfavorable blood lipid levels and a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. And then it gives an example of protein foods, including legumes like chickpeas or lentils, nuts, seeds, tofu, fortified soy beverage, fish, shellfish, eggs, poultry, lean red meat, including wild game, lower fat milk, lower fat yogurt, lower fat kefir, and cheeses lower in fat and sodium. And if you're looking for practical tips for people to enjoy things like legumes, for example, you could give a tip like, if you're making your family's chili recipe, what you could do to save money and to get more legumes or plant-based protein in the diet is you could take out half the meat and instead include a can of rinsed beans or lentils or chickpeas in your chili instead. It will still have the same great flavor with half the meat included in it, but it will up the nutritional value of it, and it will put more money back into your savings. Foods that contain mostly unsaturated fat should replace foods that contain mostly saturated fat. Why? Cardiovascular disease is one of the leading causes of death in Canada. Lowering our intake of saturated fat by replacing it with unsaturated fat decreases total and LDL cholesterol. Elevated LDL cholesterol is a well-established risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So the intention is not to reduce total fat in the diet, but rather it is to help reduce intakes of saturated fat while encouraging foods that contain mostly unsaturated fat. So, for example, whenever we can, to cook with vegetable oils, and unless it's absolutely essential because popcorn to some people cannot be eaten without butter, then eating as little as you can enjoy of the butter. And then whenever you can use the vegetable oils, replacing with that. Water should be the beverage of choice. Why? Water supports health and promotes hydration without adding calories to the diet. Water is essential for metabolic and digestive processes. Adequate intake is based on the total water required to prevent the effects of dehydration. Our biggest source of sugar in the Canadian diet is sugar-sweetened beverages. And one of the challenges with sugar-sweetened beverages is that we know that when we drink them, our bodies don't compensate for their calories. So for example, if we were to eat a snack, say you had some yogurt with some nuts and a piece of fruit, at the next meal, your body would acknowledge that you had that snack by approximately the number of calories that you ate in that snack. If you were to have drank a sugar-sweetened beverage with the equal amount of calories, when you got to the next meal, your body wouldn't acknowledge that you had that liquid snack at all. And so whenever possible, we want to eat our calories and drink water. And certainly there's some other beverages that are included. You could drink a rice milk or a almond milk, or you could drink milk, you could drink coffee, you could drink tea, and those would all be something that you could count as your hydrating beverages. Now, if it's too much coffee and tea, then there is a point where they are not hydrating, but in small amounts, they are just fine in that way. Processed or prepared foods and beverages that contribute to excess sodium, free sugars, or saturated fat undermine healthy eating and should not be consumed regularly. Why? Canadians are purchasing more highly processed foods. When consumed on a regular basis, they can contribute to excess sodium, sugars, or saturated fat. These nutrients are linked to chronic disease risk when consumed in excess. There are health risks associated with alcohol consumption. Why? Alcoholic beverages can contribute a lot of calories to the diet with little or no nutritive value. They also increase the risk of developing chronic disease. Alcohol can be a significant source of sodium, free sugars, or saturated fat when mixed with syrups, sugary drinks, or cream-based liquors. Well-established health risks are associated with long-term alcohol consumption, including increased risk of many types of cancer and other serious health conditions, such as hypertension and liver disease. And so I think Canada's Food Guide is much more clear in its recommendations and considerations. Foods and beverages offered in publicly funded institutions should align with Canada's dietary guidelines. Why? Offering healthier options and limiting the availability of highly processed foods and beverages, such as sugary drinks and confectionaries, creates supportive environments for healthy eating. And I'll have to admit that when I walk into recreation centers and I see a fast food restaurant in there, ooh, it just grates on my nerves, because we want to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And when we set up our food environments for failure, it can be so much more challenging. And I know that when offered lots of dollars when on a big building project, it's very attractive to put these types of food services in our rec centers. It does undermine healthy eating. So in Section 3 of the guidelines, the importance of food skills is so valuable. cooking and food preparation using nutritious foods should be promoted as a practical way to support healthy eating. And there are so many opportunities in the community to do this, from cooking classes for children or for seniors that are cooking for one or two, to grocery store tours, to collective kitchens. There are so many opportunities to bring back food skills into our population. So why there's been a shift from cooking meals with basic ingredients towards the use of highly processed products, which requires fewer or different skills and can also be very expensive. The increased use of these products has decreased the transfer of food skills to children and adolescents. Improving food skills by cooking and preparing food at home can contribute to improved food choices and eating behaviors among Canadians of all ages. It may also make it easier for Canadians to reduce household food waste. Under the importance of food skills, food labels should be promoted as a tool to help Canadians make informed food choices. Why? Food labels can help Canadians make informed food choices in various settings, such as grocery stores. Encouraging the use of food labels can be an effective strategy to promote the selection of nutritious foods and support the preparation of healthy meals and snacks. Now, the next 3 slides provide information that's given on the one-page summary of healthy eating recommendations that is included in this suite of resources. Eat a variety of healthy foods each day. Eat plenty of vegetables and fruit, whole grain foods, and protein foods. Choose protein foods that come from plants more often. Choose foods with healthy fats instead of saturated fat. Examples: vegetables and fruit, including fresh, frozen, or canned options. Whole grain foods, such as whole grain pasta, brown rice, and quinoa. Protein foods, such as lentils, lean meats, fish, unsweetened milk, and fortified soy beverages. And when you look at the healthy plate to the right of the slide, if you're talking to people about healthy eating, they may say, well, okay, what exactly does that mean when I'm making it on my plate? Well, when we look at our plates, we want to see half vegetables or fruits, quarter protein, and quarter grains. And so if you were looking at, for example, a breakfast, an underused breakfast in Canada is actually oatmeal. It's very inexpensive. It's high in fiber. It's wonderful for reducing cholesterol levels. And it's a whole grain. So your quarter plate may come first thing in the morning when you eat that oatmeal. But let's say you're rushed and you're heading out of the house and you don't have time to eat a huge breakfast. So what you might do is take a Greek yogurt, which would be from the protein foods, and 2 servings of fruit. You might take a banana and some berries, or a banana and an apple. And then you might be eating that mid-morning. And so over the morning time, you're eating your healthy plate. And that healthy plate is reflected in your first meal of the day and your snack. You may have included a cup of coffee with that, and there is nothing wrong with 1 or 2 cups of coffee in a day when they're well-timed. So they can help to keep people alert, decrease accidents in the workplace. It can boost your metabolic rate by 150 calories per day. Doesn't increase when you drink your second cup. That's just in the first cup. So there's many benefits to it. But I still have a lot of patients and clients that will say to me, oh, caffeine doesn't affect me. I can drink it right before bed. And I'll say to them, well, actually, it does affect how deeply you will sleep. So if you stop having any caffeine, including the caffeine that might be in green tea, and for sensitive individuals, sometimes even the caffeine that's in chocolate will affect their sleep. I'll say, well, try not to have caffeine within 8 hours of going to bed at night. And you'll find that you will be much much better rested. If we were looking at this healthy plate in terms of a lunch, for example, let's say someone didn't have time to pack their lunch and they went out for a rice bowl. Now, typically when we go out for something like this, an individual a restaurant will serve, say, 6 cups of rice with their rice bowl, and then they'll get some meat and some vegetables. I'll often counsel people to really watch the portions of the rice, because what you're actually looking for is really maybe 2/3 of a cup of rice, or about the size of your fist, would be the amount that you'd be wanting to eat. Maybe you could ask to have extra vegetables on that stir fry, and then enjoy all of the protein that was provided with it. And you can get a nice balance of a healthy plate that way. If it's a dinner meal that you're looking at, you may decide, okay, we're going to have spaghetti and meatballs tonight. Now, you would be looking at serving maybe a smaller amount of spaghetti than usual, maybe 3 ounces or 3 to 4 meatballs, and then looking at really boosting the vegetable intake. And so that might look like half a cup of steamed broccoli, a tossed salad, and the tomato sauce that was on the pasta itself, and that would make up half the plate. Now, don't despair. It's really tough for most Canadians to meet these recommendations at this time. We're not used to eating that many vegetables. But when we work on that, and if you are speaking to people about eating healthy and looking for tips that you can give, it's easier to add things to the diet than it is to take them away. And so I love talking about eating more vegetables, because people say, oh, I get more food. Huh, great. And when people eat more vegetables, they feel more satisfied with their meals. There's a good amount of fiber and lots of nutrients that go along with that. And so eating more vegetables can actually help to reduce cravings. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this summary page also includes making water your drink of choice. Replace sugary drinks with water. And this can also be a really tricky one for people if they're not used to drinking water, or some people just say it's just really hard to drink plain water. And so different strategies that they can use are things like start with, if you're drinking a lot of juice, start with pouring in half juice and then have half of it as water, and see if gradually switching over, or maybe you need to go with 3/4 juice, 1/4 water, and gradually then moving to half juice, half water. When we do these types of initiatives, anytime that someone's eating healthier or making a healthier choice, they should really give themselves a pat on the back, that we don't instantly make these habit changes. It takes time. Unsweetened drink options other than water can include lower-fat white milk, plant-based beverages, coffee, and tea. Limit highly processed foods. If you choose these foods, try to eat them less often and in smaller amounts. Prepare meals and snacks using ingredients that have little to no added salt, sugars, or saturated fat. This brings to mind pizza. And this is one of these things that most of us will enjoy pizza. And one of the strategies that I recommend with families is that when it's a pizza night, use the pizza as the grain side of it. If you can, use a whole grain crust, and maybe look at having about 2 slices of pizza. And then look at your protein foods. And by adding to the protein food, so for example, maybe you bake some fish that night, and then you serve a tossed salad with it and some raw vegetables. Having this more balanced approach to a pizza night can help Canadians eat better. If you want to delve into making a homemade pizza, using something like a bocconcini cheese on the pizza instead of a mozzarella will lower the salt content. So if you have to watch the salt in your diet, you could make a homemade tomato sauce on your pizza using just a small amount of salt, because salt is a flavor enhancer, And then using the bocconcini cheese on that pizza is going to drastically reduce the salt content. Use food labels and be aware that food marketing can influence your choices. Canada's Food Guide summary and next steps. So in summary, Canada's Food Guide is not just a single resource, but an online suite of resources that better meets the needs of the general public, policymakers, and health professionals. It's based on solid evidence and recommendations that are aligned with jurisdictions and trusted health authorities. And it's shifting to provide more actionable advice for Canadians on healthy food choices and healthy eating habits. So what's still to come? Canada's Healthy Eating Pattern for health professionals and policymakers will be released later in 2019. And what a healthy eating pattern, we're guessing what it might look like, would be to provide, for example, a sample breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, possible snack. So it could provide, it'll likely be a number of different healthy eating patterns that we can use, but we're really excited for this to be released because this will help give us further guidance. So it will build on Canada's dietary guidelines and will include a healthy eating pattern that will provide more specific guidance on the amounts and types of food. The online resources will be enhanced on an ongoing basis. And I really encourage you to go and check out those resources. You can get into some fabulous threads that will give you more information about exactly what you're looking for. And the recipes are, when I went on for the first time, I ended up printing out 10 recipes for which I've tried a number of them, and they've been excellent. In terms of considerations for Indigenous peoples, Health Canada and Indigenous Services Canada are working with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to support the development of distinction-based healthy eating tools as part of the revision process. In your communities, when looking to share the new food guide, if you wish to share messages about the food guide, you can actually access web banners and buttons that you can use in your promotion. There is a promotional poster available online. There is also the printer-friendly version of the food guide snapshot that makes a great handout. Content can be found at canada.ca/foodguide or on social media. Pound Canada's Food Guide. March is Nutrition Month. Food is nourishment, but it's so much more. Food unites us. Food can improve health, prevent disease, and keep us well for longer. At every touch point, food nourishes and inspires us. For Nutrition Month 2019, it aims to help Canadians realize the potential of food to fuel, to discover, to prevent, to heal, and to bring us together. There are Nutrition Month resources at www.nutritionmonth2019.ca. There are 5 ready-to-use fact sheets and 10 feature recipes. As well, if you haven't already checked out the Cookspiration app, www.cookspiration.com has a fantastic app with many wonderful recipes that are mobile friendly. If you're looking to find a dietitian, you can find them at www.dietitian.ca/find. It's been a very quiet session. Are there any questions?
Oh, hi. Sorry, I think I was muted there. I have I have some questions, so maybe I can start us off and we can warm us up for other people to think about some of the information because there's so much great information. I guess one of my questions is you mentioned that it's in English and French. Do you know if there's any plans for it to be translated to any other languages?
That was a question that I had as well, and I believe that they will be looking at providing it in other languages as soon as the bulk of the resources are available online. Then I believe that they'll be doing that. They've certainly done that in the past, and so I can't guarantee it, but I would expect that for the future. And that's a great
awesome
question.
I also made a little note here. You had mentioned your experience going into some of the recreational facilities and seeing that they had fast food restaurants and things like that in their rec facilities. And Community Shoeswell is actually the head of a group called CHEERS, which stands for Creating Healthy Eating Environments in Recreational Settings. So there's a group of organizations that are working towards promoting healthier food options within recreational settings. And if people are interested in that, they can definitely contact me. I'll put up my contact information here, and I can connect you to my manager, Lisa, who's working with that.
Wonderful. Oh, that is so wonderful to hear that there's groups working towards this. As a dietitian, I generally work in private practice, and this is just something that absolutely irks me because it has such a big effect on the community. It's tough. I know that when I take my children to a class at a rec center, and it's close to the dinner hour, I'll actually be the one playing defense as I'm passing that fast food outlet because they're hungry and they're saying, "Oh, I'm just so hungry. How about this?" And I'll be saying, "No, food's at home. We're going to eat as soon as we get home. You can make it." But it is tough. And if food isn't available at home or the meal wasn't planned, it's really easy to be sucked into that and to be making that quick and easy choice that's not necessarily the healthiest for the family.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, you can have healthier options on the run. And I think those options definitely should be made available within those rec facilities because that's exactly when people need them. You finish your swimming lesson or whatever you have, and you're hungry, your kids are hungry. It should be right available when people need it. So, they're working towards that.
And definitely I've noticed that when you head into different communities that there can be different things available. For example, I've been on ski hills where they provide just the most wonderful salads or creative options for lunches that may include plant-based proteins. And then I've been to other areas where they just offer the humdrum greasy spoon menu. And I think there's just such an opportunity to provide healthy food on the go. Certainly when we're preparing it in our own homes, it's a much more affordable way to provide that. But on the go, those options can still exist with creativity.
Okay, we have another question here from Tracy. She says, in the online suite of resources or items to come, is there or will there be specific recommendations for infants or very young children or how to introduce healthy foods?
That's a great question. Now, Canada's Food Guide traditionally has been only for children over the age of, now I want to be careful when I say this, it's either 2 or 4. And so we have specific advice for infants. And so it's very difficult to create an all-in-one tool with this population. And so we have specific advice for infants.
I guess I have a couple more. I always tend to write down a bunch just in case people are a little hesitant to ask questions. But I'm just wondering, is there any plan for Health Canada to monitor the impact of the new Canadian Food Guide? Like before they introduced the changes, did they set up anything to actually track how these changes might impact our communities?
Now that is a great question. And I have to believe that with all of the planning that they've done, that they have. Now, that being said, I don't work for Health Canada, so I'm not, what I've received is what everyone else has received, and I've gone in and really looked at what they've provided to us, and I'm providing that interpretation to you. So I know that they're tracking the number of hits that they get and how much resources, how much the different resources are downloaded and utilized. I would hope that they are going into the communities and seeing the impact there as well. But I certainly feel that there's the potential for a lot more use in our communities because they have provided such a great suite of resources that can really, and they've really consulted with Canadians to say, hey, what do you need? What are you wanting to utilize? What's important to you? And then looking at the evidence and using that evidence to provide the information.
That's awesome. I think, I guess along that note, I'm also I find it interesting that we have the Canadian Food Guide or Canada's Food Guide. So I'm assuming that other countries have developed some sort of guidelines around healthy eating as well. When they've been revamping the food guide, has there been any consultation with organizations outside of Canada, or is there any sort of global community where they're looking at trends out like internationally?
That's a great question. Now, I don't know if formally those communities exist formally, but absolutely we are looking at the rest of the world to see what they are providing. And for example, in 2015, a resource called Canada's Eat Well Plate was released. It didn't get any attention. I was doing quite a bit of media work at the time, and it didn't even come onto my radar. And I found it because I had seen a lot of information about a UK, United Kingdom, healthy eating plate. And when I started looking for it, I realized that Canada had one. And as a dietitian, to not even know this, I was like, wow, I'm surprised that this did not come across my path. But it was actually a tool that I was using after that time regularly with my patients and clients, and I found that they really liked using that. And when you look at Canada's Food Guide now, certainly the feedback that I shared with Health Canada was that I really liked this resource and that my patients and clients found it really easy to work with. We're seeing that Eat Well Plate on our Food Guide snapshot. The other country that was very influential in the world in food guides was Brazil. And so if you have the time to go and search the Brazil Food Guide, you'll find that what it is a lot of recommendations, a lot of discussion about avoiding processed food. It's not a single one-size-fits-all resource, and it has really moved the world forward in terms of food guides. So absolutely, they would have been looking to other places in the world.
Yeah, that's excellent. I personally, I'm a visual person, so I really appreciate having that that visual of the plate with the, this is how you divide your plate and this is what your plate should look like. I think that's just so accessible for people. It's going back to the languages. I think it doesn't matter what language you speak, as long as you have that image and you're able to see that image, you can get a decently clear picture of how you're meant to be eating, which I think is really great. Yeah,
when you're preparing your meal or even grocery shopping, you can think about, okay, what have I purchased here? Is half of what I've purchased here vegetables and fruit? Is a quarter of what I've purchased protein food? Is a quarter whole grains? Or am I short in some areas? Of course, when we're shopping, we need to go back to the store more often for vegetables and fruit in general, unless we're buying more canned and frozen. So we may be visiting the grocery store more often for those items and purchasing better prices in larger volumes for the other items like rice or that you could store more easily.
That's excellent. Okay, we've got another question here from Lynn. She says, what are your thoughts about the comments made out of Dalhousie University, Sylvain Charlevoix, not pronouncing that right probably, that the food guide discriminates against low income because of the high cost of vegetables and fruit.
So, that is a great comment. And absolutely, when making the food guide, a lot of considerations were made regarding the environment and the Canadian people. I think that fruits and vegetables are expensive, especially when they're fresh. And so it's difficult, but I wouldn't necessarily call that discrimination because Canada's food guide is based on solid evidence. So we know what we need as Canadians. And I think that there are affordable options for vegetables and fruit, especially, and I see a comment here, when they're in season. So if we look at only buying vegetables when they're in season and taking advantage of things like community gardens or even a local using things like community-supported agriculture where you can access a local farmer's bounty by, at the beginning of the season, helping to pay for the seeds. So initiatives like that, I think that with creativity and innovation, we can find different affordable ways to get fruits and vegetables. And certainly when we look at what's most expensive on our plates, the protein foods are very expensive. And when we can look at things like plant-based proteins, the cost goes down significantly, which might allow for a little bit more of the budget to go towards the vegetables and the fruits on the plate. Certainly
comment about northern communities.
Yes.
I know that it's definitely more expensive up there.
Absolutely. And it is more expensive up there. And so looking to those frozen options to look at what can be grown in the summer season if it can, and then looking at how to store foods and having education on having your own garden and then how to store those root vegetables over the winter can make a big impact in terms of cost savings. And it is a lot more work, but using those kinds of tools can be helpful in that way. These are wonderful, wonderful questions.
Yeah, I also want to add too that recently, just at the beginning of March, we hosted the Alberta Healthy Community Symposium, and one of the sessions was focused on changing the way people eat. And we had two presenters, one from the Community Bank and one from High River, and they were talking about creating some food redistribution programs. So looking at the way that food was being wasted in their communities so that they could, instead of throwing out a lot of good, usable fruits and vegetables and other foods, they were able to redistribute those foods from places like grocery stores or things like that, where they were going to go to waste. And we will be making that those sessions available on our website. So if you're interested, check that out. It should be available by the end of April on the Chooseville website as well.
Wonderful. And it's innovation and ideas from individuals like you in the community that are making our world a better place and helping to minimize the food waste and get that food where it's needed. Incredible.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? I have one more question. I guess it kind of goes back to looking at different populations, but I was just wondering if there's a kid-friendly version of the food guide.
Of Canada's Food Guide. And so there will be from Health Canada. So this is the suite of resources that are released, and then oftentimes what is created are these to fit in with the education curriculum. There will often be education resources created that will use the new food guide in different ways. And so in that respect, this is similar to what it was before, and I expect that that food guide snapshot will be utilized a lot in schools when educating about food, and then there will likely be accompanying resources that are created by about educators, by educators to help with making it the right reading level, et cetera, for those for schools. And so as it stands right now, the key messages are quite simple. Certainly when you're educating somebody in kindergarten, then you're going to be using more of the pictures because their reading skills aren't quite at a level where they're reading just yet. And so we'll see more of those resources that will likely pop up from Alberta Education.
Excellent. Okay, well, with that, if there are no further questions or comments that people want to make, I think we can probably wrap up unless there's any final comments that you wanted to say, Laura.
Well, it's just been such a pleasure to present today, and I'm really excited for you to be able to take these resources provided by Health Canada. I think that they're really positive resources that we'll be able to use in our communities to improve the health of Canadians. So thank you for your time in listening today, and I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Laura. It's been a fantastic webinar. This was very educational. Provided so many great ideas and resources. Before we go, I just wanted to mention that there will be another webinar happening after the April long weekend. It's going to be on strategy, accountability, and engagement for nonprofits and government agencies. So check that out in the next newsletter. There should be information on that. And then we will just wrap up with a quick little survey before we head out. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.